Along Came a Spider, a Marvel fanfiction written on AO3 by Amine. The link for this fanfiction will be in the description box below, so I encourage you all to go check it out. After a childhood of emotional neglect and the people he loved leaving him one way or another, Tony built up a careful persona of an indifferent arrogance. It was a lot easier to pretend he was far too good for everyone than to admit his loneliness was crippling and consuming. It was a lot easier to love him and leave him than fall into the trap of believing that he himself could be in a relationship where love was an easy give and take. Then there had been Rhodey, who for once Tony had another person he genuinely trusted outside of his mother and Jarvis. But that was it, he decided. He'd never get close to anyone else but Rhodey. He would only be Rhodey, ever. Then came Pepper, and with her came the end of the love him and leave him lifestyle he'd adopted for so long. It was startlingly easy to fall in love with her, just as it was easy to fall into her arms when it felt like the world was ending and closing in on him. Then there had been other Avengers, but like so many of his relationships, that had ended in pain, and what he thought would be death at the hands of someone he considered his closest friend. He retreated back into himself somewhat after that, resenting himself more for thinking that because of Rhodey and Pepper, he'd gotten past his fast defenses. That meant he could trust others, too. But then along came a spider. Unlike many complicated relationships he'd had with other people who'd came and gone into his life, his relationship with Peter Parker was almost annoyingly simple. Peter did something heroic, but incredibly stupid, and one of Tony's other hairs went grey, and he'd spend nights in the lab developing tech so he could prevent stupidity from entering Peter's heroics. Rinse and repeat. It was also annoying just how quickly he became attached to the kid. The same kid who one day came into his lab, singing, well, more like screaming really, along to Girls on Film, as he tinkered with his web shooters. Apparently, May had him to listen to a bunch of 80s songs in an attempt to press his date for Homecoming Dance. That never was. Or, on the other hand, it meant that Tony could listen to Duran Duran without snide comments about how old the music was. He swore. He sometimes broke out into hives every time Peter referred to his childhood as really old. But it also meant he was subjected to performances he never asked for. Even so, Tony had to hide a smile as Peter shoved off the lab table and spun around on the stool as it glided over to where Tony was trying to improve on some armor, so that the idiot spider teenager would not get hit by buses while trying to help a gaggle of kittens cross the busy street. "What you working on, Mr. Stark? Anything I can help with?" Tony glanced at him out of the corner of his eye and shrugged. "Don't get hit by a bus in the first place, champ." Even though he couldn't see it, Tony could feel Peter's smile widen, and he felt like he had to keep the corners of his own mouth from twitching upwards. "'Twas but a scratch." Tony waited for the comment about the really old movie, but thankfully it didn't come. He gave Peter a side eye, and was met with a beaming but cheeky smile. That kid was really going to be the death of him. "You actually lose any limbs, and I'll get your hot aunt to design one of your suits." Peter scoffed, but started twirling on the stool. "Oh, come on! Aunt May'll just stick me in like a padded suit. No freedom of movement or anything." "That might be better for everyone's blood pressure, kid. You can say in the puffed marshmallow man, think of merchandising potential." "Maybe you should stick to tech instead of rebranding really old movies, Dad." The only thing that broke the silence was the squeak of Peter's stool as he abruptly stopped twirling. Tony looked up at him and saw Peter swallow and stare at him with wide eyes. "Did you just call me Dad?" No. I said bad, as in your jokes are like actually the worst." He watched Peter fail spectacularly at being casual, and Tony was amazed that he managed to keep his secret life as Spider-Man a secret from May for so long. He was shifting his weight, chewing on his lip, and wrapping his arms around himself, as his gaze darted anywhere but Tony. Just as Tony opened his mouth to respond, Peter abruptly stood up, and marched with jilted steps towards the elevator, where he grabbed his abandoned backpack and gestured wildly. I gotta go. I didn't realize how, late it was getting. The early bird gets the worm and gotta seize the day and all that. It was great, Mrs. Stark. Let me know when the armor's done, Mrs. Stark." Tony waited until Peter disappeared down the closing elevator doors before he rolled his eyes and shook his head. Given his own shitty dad, Tony never expected to be called one himself, and bring back a lot of bitter feelings and memories that he avoided whenever he could help it. He just expected to make up a bunch of excuses of why he shouldn't be anyone's dad, much less one to a kid who already had a great family. Instead, he was just reminded of how there was a third person who had managed to get irrevocably under his skin with basically no effort at all. "Friday, did you get that? Play it back." "Maybe you should stick to tech instead of rebranding really old movies, Dad." Hearing it again, Tony had to laugh. This kid really was going to be the death of him.